Mayor requesting authorization to establish and appropriate funds to an operations booster stabilization fund. We've heard this as a committee a few times. The first time we heard it was on September 11th. At that point, it went to the full council on the 18th, and the council sent the item back to us in committee, and we discussed it again on September 28th, at which point we held it for further discussion. And at the end of our last meeting, there were a few specific questions that were enumerated by Councillor Kalis, I think in an attempt to summarize some of the feedback and questions from other members of the committee. And we've also all received a memo from Councillor Humphrey on the topic. What I was intending to do tonight was to start by reviewing the questions that Councillor Kalis had laid out, giving Ms. Lemieux an opportunity to respond to those questions. Then go to Councillor Humphrey and ask him to review his memo, and then give Ms. Lemieux an opportunity to respond to that, and then continue with discussion. Anything on that before I review what Councillor Kalis's questions were? Okay, I don't see any hands, so let me just briefly review those questions. The first question was about what would happen if the school population declines and we don't need to spend 70% of the funds on schools 1 year? Can we spend it elsewhere? Just to remind everybody, that refers to the 70% versus 30% split of the quote unquote freed up cash that the mayor's plan sets out for each of the next 8 years. And the question was, well, what happens if we don't need 70% of it for the schools because the school population is going down? What flexibility is there on that split, or how else we might use the money? The second question was about whether there is a different mechanism to use other than a stabilization fund that would provide for fewer restrictions and more flexibility. So in other words, perhaps the reserve fund type model that Councillor Gentile and others were referring to at the last meeting. And then the third question is, how do we know this fund won't replace the school budget's yearly increase? In other words, how do we know that this mayor or a future mayor wouldn't just reduce the school budget allocation by the amount of money that is allocated under this plan? So having laid out those three questions, I'm going to pause 1 sec because I see we've been joined by Councillor Humphrey just to review with him what I just explained to all of you. So Councillor Humphrey, I just wanted to let you know the sort of order of events in terms of how I plan to go about this discussion tonight. So the first thing that we're doing is reviewing the three questions that Councillor Kalis had enumerated that were a summary of the committee's discussion last week, and then I'm going to give Ms. Lemieux an opportunity to address those three questions. After she's finished that, I'm going to turn the floor to you to review your memo and anything you'd like to share about it. And then I'm going to give Ms. Lemieux an opportunity to respond to that, and then we'll discuss as a committee. Sound good?
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so I've laid out the three questions. Ms. Lemieux, you know what they are. If I could turn to you for your responses to those three questions, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think our response to all three of the questions, they're good questions, Councillor Kalis. And I don't think there really is a definitive answer tonight for really almost, certainly not questions 1 and 2. If the population were to decline further in the Newton Public Schools, and there was no need for additional funds to go to the schools, then I would expect the mayor, whoever the mayor is at that point in time, and the city council would want to review this arrangement and perhaps change it and do something else with it. Anything that we would be doing right now doesn't cast anything in concrete if things change over time. The same would be true, I think, about the mayor's appropriation with the budget, and what if the mayor, whoever the mayor would be, decided to only appropriate 3% to the schools and have this be, the extra 0.2%. I think we all need to recognize that things can change over time, and that just like every other ordinance that you pass or different docket items, that over time, sometimes things need to be revisited if there's been such a change in circumstances. So I don't know that that's a satisfying answer at all. But I think it's really the best answer and really the most honest one that I can give you. The other question, the one that talks about other accounts that we could set up, that one is a different answer than questions 1 and 3. The only way that an account can keep the interest that it earns is for it to either be a trust fund or a stabilization fund. And so that is why we've been trying to establish a stabilization fund the entire time. Now, could we, in each of the next 8 years, make a calculation of how much interest we think the money would have earned, and have the mayor docket an item each year, again, whoever the mayor would be, docket an item each year over the next 8 years to add that amount of, to take that interest out of the general fund revenues and to put it to that reserve fund. That could be done. I don't know that that's clean, but it could be done that way. But other than that, the only way that the funds can maintain their interest earned is by being a stabilization fund. So as I said, my answer to numbers 1 and 3 may not be terribly satisfying for people, but I think that if things change so significantly over the next few years, and if the population declines so significantly at NPS, I would think that we or you would be having lots of conversations about, where is the city heading, as far as the schools are concerned.
Okay, I see that we have a few hands, so I'm going to assume they're related to these questions on the back and forth. I'll take them quickly. I also want to just acknowledge we've been joined by Councillor Downs, not a member of the committee, from Ward 5. Councillor Kalis, through your questions, so I'll recognize you first, and then Councillor Laredo.
Thank you. I appreciate that one. So just one follow-up question, Ms. Lemieux. So if things do change, and that was just an example of the schools, if the population declines, but would it then take, is it 3/4 or 2/3 a vote of the council to allocate those dollars?
2/3, yes, 2/3, and to change the purpose, 2/3. It only takes a simple majority to put more money into the stabilization fund if we wanted to. So let's say next year, if the fund was in place and working great and everybody loved it, and we had some huge windfall of money and we thought, wow, this is a great idea, we should add more money to the fund, that would only take a simple majority. But otherwise, to change the purpose and to approve spending, it's 2/3.
Okay, and then I lied. There's one other follow-up question. If we do nothing, are you saying that that money would not be earning interest? I think you seem to intimate that it's only in this fund that it would be earning interest.
No, it's only in this fund. I'm sorry if I confused people. All interest earned on our investment pool, if you will. So the overlay account, free cash, obviously all of the property tax revenue that comes and goes and flows through the city, all of that interest goes to the general fund. So unless it's a stabilization fund, so the rainy day stabilization fund, every month or quarter, between the treasurer and the comptroller, they determine how much money the rainy day fund earned, and that money is pulled from what you see. So when you see an interest earned number in the general fund, it's net of the investments earned by the capital, by the rainy day. And I think probably the energy stabilization fund, I'm not sure if that interest moves. But so any interest earned on these funds while we're talking about them all goes to the general fund. I think it was Councillor Gentile who said a couple of meetings ago, but we could always add it to it. And that's why I say that's what we would do. It would have to be an action that would come through you. It is not something that would happen automatically.
Thank you.
All set for now, Counselor Kalis?
Yeah.
Okay, and Counselor Laredo, and then I'm going to go to Counselor Humphrey.
Thank you, Ms. Lemieux. So again, I just want to be clear on a couple things, and then I have an observation as to what you're saying. So we will earn interest no matter what, if we create this fund or not. We could hold this money in free cash for next year or the year after. There's no requirement we spend it. We could figure out exactly what that interest is and move that to free cash. We could do all those things, right?
That's we can't move the interest to free cash during the course of a year while it's earning the interest. It would drop to next year's free cash, and then we could move it around.
Okay, so you could figure out on $40 million, whatever the exact amount of interest we earn at $40 million, and then make a decision not to spend it and move it to free cash. So all you're doing here is creating a fund which you're saying is going to essentially provide more money to the schools primarily. I'm going to be clear. I understand and appreciate the idea of putting this money in a separate fund. I can argue that you might as well keep it in free cash. I don't see any difference whatsoever, quite frankly. But the idea that this council would tie its hands for 8 years when it would be extraordinarily easy for any mayor to change the allocation to the schools at any time, and the 3.5% that the mayor is citing, which you cited, is just what you hope to do in the future. There's no promise or guarantee or requirement for it. So I'm having a very, very hard time understanding the insistence of the administration to tie up the ability of future mayors and future city councilors to allocate this fund in different proportions over different years. It is one-time money. I fully agree with that concept, and I fully agree that we ought not just take one-time money and spend it on operating expenses right now. That doesn't make sense to me. But I think you're creating frankly, I don't want to say a false narrative. It's not fair. I understand the desire here, but it's a misleading narrative to the public, because the public somehow thinks that there's a guaranteed 3.5% increase every year to the schools. That's simply not accurate. That can and has changed on a yearly basis during my tenure in city government. It goes up and go down, depending what the city's finances are like. And all you're doing is creating an ability to increase it or raise it. So that's where I stand on this, and appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thanks. So, Ms. Lemieux, I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer that. I see Councillor Gentile's hand is up too. And what I want to do is try to just keep this part of the conversation to Councillor Kalis's questions, clarity on the answer, debate, and everybody's opinions about what they want to do, what sort of votes we should take, et cetera. I would really like to sort of consolidate once we have a chance to get through this portion of Q&A and clarification in Councillor Humphrey's memo. So Councillor Gentile, let me come to you. I'm going to assume this is sort of a back and forth on these questions.
Yes.
Right.
Actually, I really just have one question for Maureen. I have heard, what's the matter with my video? All right, there we go. I have heard secondhand that the mayor is I think one of the reasons that we sent this back is that some folks were hoping that the mayor would, propose some changes or agree to some changes, especially in the stabilization fund versus just a regular reserve fund. As Councilor Laredo pointed out, it's a simple accounting move that could be done during the budget to make sure that the money goes into this fund so it continues to grow. It's not rocket science. I think we all know that. But we were hoping that the mayor might come back and work with us. I've heard secondhand that the mayor's not interested in making any changes to the plan that she has proposed. So my only question to Maureen is that accurate? And if you were in fact just holding with what you originally proposed and you're not showing any flexibility, I think it can be a short meeting myself. I don't know. I'm getting tired of hearing myself talk about the same thing over and over. And I'm sure the administration is. And I think that, we can just move, vote this thing out, which I'm told is what the mayor wants. And we can discuss it at the full council. But let's not beat this to death. Unless, Maureen, there's something that I'm missing and the mayor is agreeing to some kind of a change.
Thank you, Councillor Gentile. I do have some comments after Councillor Humphrey gives his presentation or discussion about his memo. I do have some comments that I would like to make, but you are correct in your understanding. We are not coming here tonight with a change of our plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Humphrey, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, like Councillor Gentile just said, we can probably keep this relatively short, as the mayor expressed in a call to me on Friday that she is not interested in discussing further changes on this proposal and would like us to vote it out, and we can see what happens there, although it sure sounds like it's not going to pass. She seemed to agree with that assessment, I think. And I think most of my memo is relatively self-explanatory, but it kind of is in a similar vein in many ways to the remarks that we just heard from Councilor Laredo, which is that as things stand now and without further, discussions and negotiation and so forth, the proposal that's before us is incredibly restrictive for very little specific benefit to doing it this way, and financially isn't going to get us that much progress even for the schools. So we are just essentially tying our hands for quite a long period of time. And once the 2/3 vote has been reached on something to set it up, yes, you could change it with a 2/3 vote in the future, but that also means making sure that whatever change you make isn't opposed by 9 people in the future. So it's one thing to get it set up in the first place. If you have to make changes later, that could actually be much more difficult. And we're hearing tonight that, even more money could be put in by a simple majority, which means that once it's set up, that's potentially minority control over what happens with this. As I expressed in my memo, and I understand this is, completely vehemently disagreed with by the administration, but what I said in my memo is we're talking about essentially an 8-year period, potentially even longer if the retirement board decided, toward the end of the process or based on conditions that arise to change the date of the full funding of the pre-funding of the pensions. We're talking about 8 years, which is not a tremendous amount of time. The assumptions underlying this are quite pessimistic. They assume definitely no override happening in that 8-year period. They also assume almost zero new development, I guess, other than Northland. And I think that, yes, there are some projects that are stalled right now, but saying that there's not going to be any major new developments built between now and 8 years from now seems awfully pessimistic to me. And, there's also the potential option with some leadership to, work out a different plan with the retirement board if it came down to it in the final years, especially as we got quite close. Many communities do that. I'm not saying they're going to change their position in the coming fiscal year, but, with some leadership and negotiation there, that could potentially be revised. And if you did arrive at a situation where you were really, really, you know, in a true pinch and you could not come up with the funds, you still have options at that point, other untapped resources and things like that. The amount of money we're talking about coming up with over an 8-year period is not actually that much money. And it's, I think, defies most logic for our voters to suggest that we can't figure out how to bridge that gap. And if it absolutely came down to it, and we had to make mass layoffs, and we weren't willing to tap into other resources or couldn't for some reason for, you know, the 2 years that we needed to bridge, it is a lot easier for people to understand that you're making significant cuts at that point, at that very specific pinch point, because you're out of options, than to just gradually be chipping away at everything over an 8-year period when it seems like we're, at least from the perspective of the voters, flush with cash. And as I've said many times, spending decisions that we make now have to be geared toward changing public opinion on whether or not the city is going in the right direction or the wrong direction, and changing public opinion, at least among, you know, in my view, a swing block of people to get an override passed, so there are additional permanent operating revenues to help us in these 8 years. So I think there's options. I think it's doable. I think there's room for flexibility and compromise. I laid out, you know, kind of an unofficial proposal of just some ideas that, you know, I and some others had in terms of things that could really potentially move the needle with public opinion, with short funding surges, not permanent increases. And then I was even willing to concede some permanent operational spending changes on the NPS side at an amount that I think would actually close the budget gap, and that I believe, you know, with some thinking outside the box and creativity and care and leadership and negotiation, we could come up with a way for over an 8-year period of continuing to sustain those. I understand, again, that that's not the position of the mayor and the CFO, but I think there's plenty of other voices in this city with plenty of financial expertise, including public finance, that say that the assumptions being made here are too pessimistic, and, as I expressed in my memo, actually setting us up for failure because of how pessimistic they are, that they're going to make it less likely that public opinion turns around. And I think that would be a huge mistake. Again, I'll just pretty much leave it there, because I understand that the administration was not interested in this, you know, proposal that I put forward. I certainly would have been willing to meet on the middle on something like that. But as things stand, I can't support the proposal before us. It's simply too restrictive. It's too long of a period. It's too pessimistic. And it's a paltry amount of money toward the schools relative to what the actual need is. So I would argue that this is, in fact, an anti-schools plan that is locking in a pretty dire position for the schools. And so, you know, I'm not going to take up too much more of your time if I can help it, but I did feel very strongly about pointing out that there are other opinions out there, not just one way of doing this. Thank you.
Ms. Lemieux, let me give you an opportunity to reply to that first, and then we'll open it up for discussion. You're muted.
Sorry about that. 3.5 years in, and we all still do it. If I can, what I would like to do is just make an opening comments, because then, you know, clearly, you all have your deliberations in front of you. And just in case we have a couple of counselors who have not had the opportunity to be part of the conversation, I know we've discussed it here in finance, but so thank you for giving me the opportunity. I would say to all of you, the purpose of this fund has remained the same from the very beginning. It is to provide additional operating funds to the Newton Public Schools over the next 8 years, while relieving pressure on the general fund and enabling us to meet the pension funding schedule as set by the retirement board. It is actually a very simple complex concept that I think people have made more complicated than it really is. By taking this $26 million and establishing this stabilization fund, we will be able to earn interest on our money. And from a very conservative estimate, we will be able to steer approximately $22 million to NPS over the next 8 years. That's it. there's a lot of misinformation out there that I just want to address fairly quickly. Some people in this, Councilor Humphrey, thank you for your memo. I read it very carefully. So some of these comments that I make are not your memo. It's other information that we have also read out there that I want to just clarify. Some people think that our budget is now going to increase by as much as $3 million a year because of the Eversource settlement. Unfortunately, our budget isn't going to increase at all as a result of that. We budget up to the full levy limit every year. We have done so throughout the full time that Eversource has been challenging their value. What will change, so our budget can't change, what will change is that we will now actually on a yearly basis receive the $800,000 each year that was in dispute. And so there is not going to be a budget infusion because Eversource has withdrawn their appeals. We also have people who think that we have purposely and repeatedly underestimated our revenues. This is also not true. We are perhaps one of the most aggressive communities in pushing our revenue budgets and when we're actually putting them together so that we can put as much money into our expenditure budget as possible. You hear me every year saying it all starts with the revenue. We absolutely do not try to underestimate our revenues. In fact, Moody's has several times said to us that one of the concerns that they have is that our free cash is not as high as other communities. I don't believe it ought to be. I've never agreed with that. Some communities have huge amounts of free cash. I don't understand why they do. I think we should be trying to budget our revenues as high as we can, without thinking that we would ever come short with our revenues, and therefore end up providing as much in the way of services and education as we possibly can. We average less than 3% certified cash each year. I have a chart. I'm not looking to put it up and have this debate tonight with all of you, but I would love to sometime, Madam Chair, go through some of these different issues sometime in the near future and really make sure that the Finance Committee actually has the real facts in front of all of you. So I certainly won't look to do that tonight, but I offer that as something for the committee. Some people would like us to slow down our pension contributions and further, for even more so than we did this past year, and renegotiate with the retirement board to extend the funding date. That is not within, as you all know, that is not within our purview. The retirement board worked with us graciously last spring. They extended the schedule. We lowered the amount that we are increasing in the budget each year for retirements. And if that were going to change, it's the retirement board that will have the full say on that. It is not us. Other people might want to see us transfer one-time funds to the school department. And then when those funds run out, utilize the rainy day fund. I dare say that we are certainly all witnessing the impacts of climate change. I think if any of us take a look at the city of Leominster and what they've gone through recently, I think it makes it very, very clear how badly we need to have a rainy day fund. When the pandemic started, FEMA announced that they would expedite the reimbursable funds to municipalities. Well, 3.5 years after that announcement of them expediting, we still haven't seen any funds from FEMA. So if those other federal packages hadn't come through, we have not seen a nickel yet from FEMA reimbursing us for the costs that we incurred. Other people think that maybe we should do these things and spend this money now, and maybe there will be an override that will pass. We've actually listened to all of these suggestions very, very carefully. And in the end, I would say that philosophically, the mayor and I do not agree with them. And so I think that's where the rub really is. We believe that one of the most important issues facing the city is financial support for the operations of the Newton Public Schools. We believe that we have an opportunity to take this overlay surplus and use these funds to create a mechanism that will allow us to create an ongoing funding source for the next 8 years for NPS. Establishing this fund will provide about $22 million to NPS over these next 8 years. For our one-time needs, we have been extremely fortunate to have the amount of free cash declared that we had this year. There are two reasons why we have the amount of free cash that we do. One is that we earned $8.4 million more than we budgeted for interest income. We never could have budgeted what happened last year. We are actually benefiting again this year. So at least, even though we didn't budget for it, and we won't budget for tremendously high interest income, because that really is almost another one-time revenue source for us. But I can assure you, we are looking forward to coming to you with a list of the highest and best uses that we think the city ought to use our free cash funds on. We are looking forward to working with you, with our department heads, with the school administration, with the school committee, to come up with what that list ought to be. All of these things are important for me to say here tonight, but the most important thing is none of this, what we're going to do with free cash, and none of these other misconceptions or anything else that's out there, none of this is really the question that is at hand before you. The question is, do you want to support our endeavor to create an ongoing funding stream, primarily for the operations of the Newton Public Schools over the next 8 years? It really is that simple. So thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the latitude to make those comments.
Thank you. We have 3 hands. I'm going to start in the committee and then take others. So Councillor Kalis, then Gentile, then Laredo.
Thank you. And thanks for that response, Ms. Lemieux. I heard what you just said. I guess my question is, without the fund, can't we still earn interest and spend the money on the schools? Just not have it restrictive and inflexible?
We can still earn interest and put more of free cash next year to our budget. Right now, our financial management guidelines say that we do not put more than 1.5 million of free cash toward the next year's budget. The whole intent of that is so that we're not relying on carry forwards or funds that are one-time funds to build the base of our budget. That's why our financial management guidelines say what they do. Can we change those? Yes, I think that was approved. Councilor Gentile certainly worked on those with me years ago. I think our financial management guidelines were actually approved through the then Board of Aldermen, City Council now. So we would probably need to work with you to change it. Can we put more money toward the budget next year from free cash? The answer is yes. Can we do the calculations that would allow us to know how much money this fund would have earned in interest over the course of the year? The answer is absolutely yes. What we were trying to do here was create, a true stream of revenues. We were trying to really have a commitment to doing this. If we just leave these funds in free cash, we all know there are so many needs in the city, and we may be doing great, spending so much more money than we've ever spent on road paving. I think everybody on this screen would probably agree that probably the biggest complaint you all get are the roads in the city. We know that. We hear it at City Hall every day. We've spent we have all kinds of great things happening in Parks and Rec. We've built all kinds of buildings. We've done fabulous things in the last 10 or so years. But we all know, we still have so much more to do. So there will always be a huge list of legitimate one-time needs, real needs that we need to spend money on. And so I think for us to think that we would ever keep a fund that's just rolling over every year into free cash, I don't, this is me personally, I don't believe that's realistic. I think the human nature in all of us will want to start using those funds to do different things. I think people will want us to use them. So this actually was purposeful, putting this in front of you and looking. We most of the decisions we make tie the hands of future boards and future mayors. We sign collective bargaining agreements all the time that are, 3 years. We build buildings. We sign, we bond all kinds of capital expenditures and tie the hands of future boards for years and years. That's kind of what we do. And so I understand people's concern about that. I really do. But I believe to my core that setting this fund up and knowing that we have a mechanism to provide relief over these next 8 years, and it's really when we get to years 5, 6, 7, and 8, that it's substantial money that would be going to the schools. I personally, to my core, believe that this is the right thing for us to do.
So you're making us, you just don't believe that we're disciplined enough to just dedicate the money to the schools, which I think I agree with, because you can't, there's so much, there's 24 of us, and you don't know where they're going to go. I'm struggling with this because I do believe in the mission. I also see Councilor Laredo's point about the playing with the 3.5%. If you could tell me that, along with this, we're going to guarantee that 3.5% for the schools plus whatever this.
I unfortunately could never tell you that somebody couldn't play around with the numbers. Clearly this mayor's intent is to stick with our plan. Now, obviously, her term, at least this current term, ends in 2 years. Beyond that, I don't know if she's going to run again. None of us know who the mayor will be for the next 6 years. I could never say to you that someone won't try to play with it. I would hope if somebody did, that as a council, you would all be the watchdogs.
All set for now, Councilor Kalis? Yes, okay. So we now have 3 hands from the committee. Councilor Laredo, I'm going to ask you to be patient, if you don't mind, if I stick with the committee first, and I'll come to you. Okay. Councilor Gentile, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by making a motion to deny the item that is in front of us. And I just want to add what I think is a new thought from at least me, that I want to share with the rest of the committee in support of denial. First of all, I am not suggesting that this money drop to free cash. I've been pretty consistent, and as have others, that it should be set up as a reserve fund with some language, very simple language that says that it is a reserve fund designed to support the operating and capital needs of the city budget, and keep it real simple like that, and retain the flexibility that a lot of us have been talking about. That's what I have been suggesting. I would not want the money to drop to free cash. We were joined last time, and I appreciated that she showed up, by the new superintendent. And, I have also been clear that I continue to have questions about the amount of money that the schools in the school department and school committee tells us that they need every year. And I would just like some more explanation. I went and did a little homework today with Evan's help, our clerk, and the enrollment analysis showed that over the last 4 years, the system has lost about 1,000 students. It's very close to 1,000 students or a little more. And if you look at their projections, come 2027, they're projecting that there will be another 700 students less. And that's another reason why I think you got to remain flexible and not lock yourselves into these percentages and so forth. The updated enrollment figures, I wish we had them, but I guess they're coming out later this month. So it'll be interesting to see what those look like. And then the final thought is, I have been looking forward to getting a new superintendent. It had nothing to do with, wanting to get rid of Fleischman, but Dr. Fleischman, I was looking forward to the opportunity where there was a new set of eyes that could come in and look at this budget, because I honestly believe that there are some areas where we can deliver the needed quality services, but maybe with a different model that will help to save some money. And I think even from the brief comments that I heard from the new superintendent, I believe that she's serious in looking into that. And I'd like to give her the opportunity to do so. Unfortunately, she comes here and she has, the worst nightmare that any superintendent could have, which is this business with, teacher salaries and so forth. So obviously, she hasn't been able to get into the budget, I'm sure, to the degree that she wants to, but I'm sure that she will, and I'll be interested in hearing what she has to say and if there are ways of making some economies that won't upset the delivery of services. So I look forward to that, because I don't understand with declining enrollment the way that it is, and the chart that we got, this chart that we got from the administration detailing the one-time savings and the annual ongoing savings, it's significant money. It's $2.4 million in one-time savings and just under $3 million in permanent savings. That the actions that the mayor's office has already taken. So I'll leave it at that. As I say, I'm moving denial, and hopefully, this gets denied and we can talk about setting the funds up in a different kind of reserve fund. There's no rush. There's no rush. We're getting over 5% interest right now on this money. We can revisit this in the beginning of next year. We could revisit it at budget time, and hopefully there'll be more willingness to negotiate, or not negotiate, just to collaborate. And then we can set up a fund that is just less restrictive. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And we have a motion to deny on the table. Councillor Humphrey, then Oliver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I associate myself with the closing remarks there of Councillor Gentile in terms of why to vote to deny this. It's just, there's a lot of ways we could come at this and slice this and so forth, but we can't do that until we've moved this one aside, because that's what the proposal is at the moment. I had a couple of minor questions that came up in Councillor Lemieux's remarks after what I said. First, I was surprised to hear your reference to the rainy day fund in relation to climate change. You had previously expressed to this committee that you had no intention of ever tapping into the rainy day fund for any other reasons short of, I guess, a civilization level ending event like an asteroid or something like that, or, huge nuclear apocalypse. So is that a change in policy? Are we going to be hearing about that in Finance Committee?
If I may, that is absolutely not a change in policy. It is not my desire to ever have to go to the rainy day fund. I've been clear about that. I worked very, very hard to figure out how to get funds into that stabilization fund. But what I'm saying is what I've always said. I think you can look back at budgets for years saying that a until we had the pandemic, I always thought that if we ever had to go to the rainy day fund, it would be for a catastrophic weather event. That has not changed, in my opinion. However, I'm hoping we never have to go there.
Thank you. Again, obviously, as I've said before, I understand where you're coming from on that fund. I disagree with that policy, and I just didn't think it was relevant to bring it up in that context because that didn't really seem like a realistic way you were planning to use it. The other thing is, I was very surprised to hear you again suggest tonight that part of the problem here is a sort of a kind of forbidden temptation of future councilors and mayors to use the money too quickly or too upfront. Previously, the mayor had actually expressed apologies for a line that she put in her initial email announcement, suggesting that we couldn't trust city councilors and future mayors to budget responsibly, and therefore she had to implement this plan. She's also certainly, expressed to me that this was a legacy way of implementing her fiscal views long after she's the mayor, which I think, again, we can understand why a lot of councilors and potential future mayors aren't really interested in tying our hands in that way. And it's not the same to tie it over 8 years with this particular mechanism as, say, a capital project that you've started work on or something like that. I don't see that comparison as valid. But the other thing is, I understand that it's your opinion, but it's not a fact. Why is it a problem to spend the money up front, or at least a significant portion of it up front? Because I understand you can make an argument for spreading it out over time, but the notion that it's irresponsible automatically to spend it now, I don't buy that as an automatically true statement. I think that could definitely be argued against, and that's certainly what I floated in my memo, is there's a very strong case to be made for spending the money while you have it in ways that are going to improve the city and improve public morale and also generate savings long term. There's a lot of things we could be doing with one-time funds to create savings. We tried to do some of those things with ARPA funds. I don't really understand what the problem is inherently with spending at least some significant portion of it up front. I know that's not your position, but it's a valid position.
So I think, Councillor Humphrey, if we did not have the luxury of having the amount of free cash that we have currently, I would philosophically maybe have a slightly different viewpoint and maybe look to use some of this money for one-time funds. What's different is that we have $27 million, almost 28 million, I think, in free cash. Now we have needs for some of that money, but it's more free cash than we were expecting to have. And so because of that, we have the opportunity to use our free cash for one-time items. As far as why I feel so strongly about this, 84% of our revenue comes from property taxes. That is constrained and only can increase by 2.5% each year. 7% of our revenues come from the state in the form of Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid. That 7% most years does not increase by much more than 2.5%. So 91% of our budget is constrained in its increases. The rest of the money, our excise tax, if you look back over the years, does not fluctuate much at all. So we know, and that's one of our next largest areas of revenue. We know that we are looking to increase our pension funding by I think it's $24 million over the next 8 years. I believe it's a 60 or 65% increase in that line item. That's a lot of money. Nobody was wrong last spring when we had the group of councilors who were pushing to have the pension appropriation lowered a bit. It is going to crowd out other things. And so in my opinion, it's just my opinion, but I've been doing budgeting for, God, I'm afraid to say this, over 40 years I've been putting budgets together. I believe that we need to relieve the pressure on the city, not by doing it. What we didn't agree with last spring was not by extending the funding schedule for pensions any further than 2032, because different things can happen with the economy where the pension funds could ultimately end up having to get extended. I don't think we should be choosing to extend it. And that's why I think we should be setting this fund up to provide relief as we get to those years that become more and more difficult. It's a different, I think we just have a different philosophy and, can agree to disagree. I feel very strongly about it, but it's because of all of the other constraints that we have.
Well, and to be clear, I think that, as a member of the finance committee, I'm certainly very familiar with the ways that we use free cash on a year-to-year basis for typical needs. And so I would never suggest, burning through all of it all at once or anything like that. But I think that there are multiple pathways to fiscal responsibility here. And it's bumming me out, frankly, that we're not having a real conversation about how to meet and compromise on that, because of the rigidity of assuming that there's only one way to do this. And I just, it did not have to be like this, but also there is a legitimate argument fiscally for spending at least a pretty significant chunk of the Eversource money in particular upfront rather than spreading it over time, because had we been collecting it as revenue normally, and in a way we could have spent it, if it was not tied up in litigation, it would have been getting spent all of those years on various things. And instead we had to make hard choices and defer maintenance on a lot of things and avoid spending on certain projects that we needed to do. And so I would like us to do some catch-up money here. I understand that it's not infinite. I'm not arguing for making permanent changes to all these different departments. I'm saying there are some very key areas of the city where we could make some short-term funding surges for 2 or 3 fiscal years and get some really huge results that would really make people feel like the city is headed in the right direction. And I think that's absolutely critical to the long-term fiscal health of this city, because a lot of that, for the reasons you just mentioned in terms of where the revenues come from, a lot of that depends on the morale and public opinion in the city and how people feel about the real estate market here and so forth. So again, I'm supporting Councilor Gentile's motion to deny this, and hopefully that's it from me for tonight. Thank you.
Councilor Oliver.
Well, I will certainly be a lot quicker. I love hearing this conversation. I believe that everything I just heard from Councilor Humphrey, Councilor Gentile, expresses where I am with this. I would also like to add that attached to our packet this evening was proof positive that the administration and I believe this council do have the ability to identify funds and then hold them aside for a specific reason until the following fiscal year. We just have to be, we have to be better at it over the course of 8 years. I would agree with that, but we're completely capable of not only baking flexibility into how these funds need to be used with the schools over the course of the next 8 years, without creating this fund. Because let's face it, everything that Ms. Lemieux and this administration actually want to do, except the mechanism by which we're doing it, at least as far as I've heard, all makes sense to me. So I'm just going to sit down and hope we get to vote this out here, but I will be supporting the motion to deny. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before I go to the second round of comments, Councilor Laredo, you've been very patient. Did you want to say something further?
Just a very brief question. Ms. Lemieux, I'd asked you offline about how you calculated the free cash totals when you compared other communities and whether that included other communities' rainy day funds. Do you have an answer to that? You're muted, Ms. Lemieux.
Excuse me. did some research into that. Jonathan was the one who was putting it together. We can actually send that information out to you. I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but we did look into that, and we have some information that we can send you.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, Ms. Lemieux, if also, rather than doing the 5-year averages, you could do this year. That would, and granted, this year is an extraordinary amount of money. We all agree on that, but I think that would be also helpful if you could do that too. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sit.
Thank you. Councillor Califf.
Thank you, Chair. So what I'm struggling with is that I think Councillor Gentile, I think Councillor Humphrey and Councillor Oliver and Councillor Rado have great ideas on how to spend the money, how to allocate the money. I think the council can be disciplined. But the problem is, none of us are the mayor and have the ability to actually allocate the money where we want it. And so if we reject this, then we're rejecting a funding source for the next 8 years for the schools. Something that every year since I've been here, and that's 12 years now, that we've always asked for more money for the schools. So what's the chance that we're not going to want to use this money for the schools? Probably pretty slim. Ms. Lemieux, if this is denied, what will you do with the money?
Well, Counselor, we will go back to our drawing board. We will certainly look at what some of the one-time items are. I think the mayor will want to, again, speak with you as a council, with our department heads, with the school committee, with the school administration, and figure out where we go from here. What I don't think is that it will, this is what I believe, because that's all I can answer for you right now. I don't believe it will translate into operational funds for NPS for years to come.
All right, thank you. As much as I feel like this is restrictive, and as much as I am frustrated by the mayor and her unwillingness to bend on any of the points that people have made, I'm more leaning to supporting it because I want dedicated money for the schools. And it's being served up. And otherwise, I don't know that we're going to get it. And all of the ideas that we have, they're fabulous, but none of them, I think under this mayor, have a chance of becoming reality. You know, I'd love for Councillor Gentile's idea of that other type of fund where it is established. It's not going to happen. So that's why I'm probably going to vote yes. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Councillor Humphrey, then Noel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Councillor Kalis, I think pretty much all of us who are opposing this plan also want to fund the schools. Part of what we're saying is this plan is nowhere near a sufficient amount of money or structure of money to fund the schools adequately and sufficiently. That's the problem. And it's locking in this amount of money over a long period of time insufficiently. And so this is arguably creating more problems for the schools compared to what we should be talking about. And the mayor has the opportunity to negotiate if she chooses. That's a choice, whether or not she does. It is a strong mayor form of government. I understand that. And at the budget time, we have basically no power. This is an area where we do have power because she wants to get 2/3 of the council to vote for something. And if you want that done, you negotiate. That's how government works. I'm sorry. This is what we're doing right now is part of the negotiation process. And, you know, I would have liked it to be more collaborative and consultative from the start. So, you know, it's not personal what I'm saying here. It's not about personalities or anything like that. This is strictly business. But I just don't see this as the answer. And if I have to wait 2 additional fiscal years to get a different mayor who's going to be more willing to work with the council on this stuff and fund the schools properly, that's better than tying our hands for 8 years now. Thank you.
Counselor Noel, then Gentile, then Maliki.
I align myself with Counselor Humphrey's comments that he just made.
Counselor Gentile.
Maureen, one structural issue. If we had just a general reserve fund that I and others have been suggesting, and we make it clear it's for operations and capital, I don't think it's not a big deal either way, but I don't think we'll even have to amend our guidelines because, as you point out, the guidelines, I think, specifically talk about, free cash. And if we don't let this drop to free cash, I think we'll be fine. I don't see it. I think the funds can be used for operations. So
I would agree with you, Counselor Gentile. And in fact, if this were to pass, I would not suggest that we amend our guidelines to use the stabilization fund either. So if there is a reserve fund, I would agree with you. Our guidelines only talk about free cash.
Okay, and then to Counselor Kalis, David, I hear your frustration, but I've seen a lot of different councils over the years, including ones when I was on the school committee advocating, for funds all the time for the schools. But I think that we have allowed this is the most irrelevant legislative body when you talk about Board of Aldermen and now City Council that I have seen in all of my years. And I'm not looking to insult people. Like I'm insulting myself because I'm part of the council, but we're relatively irrelevant, and it's our own fault. Because every time we get into one of these things, the mayor holds firm. She's very good at counting votes, and she gets her way, so she continues to not negotiate. And I'd like you between now, I know how you're going to vote tonight, I get it, but I hope you'll give that some thought when we get to the full council. We need to stand up once in a while and be a little bit more relevant. We have allowed ourselves to become extremely irrelevant. And again, I don't blame the mayor, because there's so many times when she's, hung in there and gotten just enough votes for something. And so we allow it to happen. So anyway, that's my final plea for tonight. And we should have, I guess, a good discussion at the full council.
Counselor Maliki.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Lemieux. I'm not sure I heard this right. When Counselor Kalis asked you what would happen if this did not pass, and would funding still go to the schools? It sounded like you said not for some years, and I'm wondering why that would be if the mayor is willing to spend funds on the schools in this method, why she would not be willing to do it under a different plan, say a reserve fund.
So thank you, Councilor Maliki. Just in case I was not clear, what I would be surprised if it happened is if money was around for fiscals 29, 30, 31, 32, where it's really substantial money that we're talking about. Would this mayor do more for the schools? I don't know. We haven't had that conversation. As far as the budget is concerned, as you all know, you all received the financial forecast a few weeks ago. We're certainly projecting millions of dollars of a gap. We always do. I always find ways to close it and to get it closer and closer each year. But I cannot tell you what the budget would look like.
So you're saying, so you're not saying that funds would not go to the schools in the near term years. You're saying that you think it would run out by the later term of the 8 years.
I'm saying I don't know, because we don't know who the players will be as time goes on. I don't know. And I wouldn't want to speculate.
Yeah, I just have trouble understanding why, as previous speakers have said, why it has to be done this way. Why can't we just say we want to save this money and spend it over time, put it in an account, whether it's an account or a specially named fund or whatever it is, why it needs to be set aside in something that requires a 2/3 vote to spend. So thank you.
Okay, that's all the hands I see for now. I think it won't surprise anyone to know I am not in favor of the motion to deny. I oppose the motion to deny. I've stated pretty clearly up front how I feel about this. To me, it makes sense, and it's pretty simple, and it's pretty straightforward. And after the health, safety, and general security of our community being the highest priority, the kids and their education is the highest priority to me. And I want the money to be able to go to the schools in a way that they can look and say, okay, we know what this additional revenue stream is going to be. And therefore we can make commitments like hire another couple teachers or whatever the needs are that they deem that they need in order to educate our kids. I get the questions around enrollment, and I am not a school committee member. I can't say that I've studied every up and down in enrollment and what the corresponding impact budget-wise would be. But I feel very similarly to what Councillor Kalus expressed in the earlier part of his last comment, which is that every year that I've been around, we're looking for more money for the schools. And here's an opportunity, in my view, to add some more money to the schools. Is it necessarily sufficient to meet all of the educational needs of the future? I don't know that we will ever have an amount of money that we all feel is sufficient. I've never once gone through this budget process where folks have said, nope, it's good. We've got what we need and everything's perfect. And I only feel further fueled by the recent, just as an example, MCAS results that came out. That's not even scratching the surface of the mental health and social emotional needs. But when I look at the Bigelow Middle School MCAS report and see that in 2023, 60% of seventh graders were either meeting or exceeding expectations in math, and 40% of our seventh graders at Bigelow Middle School, therefore, are not meeting or exceeding expectations for math. That says to me, we need resources, and we're probably going to have to hire people. And I just don't see how the superintendent would be in a position to be able to do that if money is in either a reserve fund for the general operating and capital needs of the whole city without any sort of clarification about what she may expect in the interim years to come, particularly when we're talking about this particular 8-year period of time between now and when our pension is projected to be fully funded. So for me, it's simple. My vote is a vote to give resources on a predictable, ongoing basis to the schools, and that's it. So any other comments, discussion before we take a vote on Councillor Gentile's motion? Councillor Norton.
Yeah, I've had a lot to say the last 2 meetings, so I'll just keep it short. I agree with everything that Councillor Greenberg just said. This seems like a reasonable proposal. I'm not one who reflexively supports the mayor every time she has something. I'm sure she would agree with that. But in this case, I'm very comfortable with what she's proposing, so I will not be voting in favor of rejecting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Last thing that I will also just add is that one of the other reasons this makes sense to me is that it very closely mirrors different ideas that we were talking about in the spring when we were looking for ways to reduce the growth in pension appropriation from 6.6% further down. And the point of that for many folks who were looking at it, not necessarily everyone, was to figure out how we would then, free up more money to go to the schools, which in my view, this is mirroring exactly what those conversations were about, at least for me. Okay, I don't see any other hands. So why don't we call the roll on this, Mr. Cudmore? Just to remind everyone, the motion on the table is to deny this item. So if you're in favor of denial, your vote is aye. If you are against denial, your vote is no.
Councilor Grossman,
No.
Councilor Kalis,
No.
Councilor Norton,
No.
Councilor Oliver,
Aye.
Councilor Maliki,
Aye.
Councilor Humphrey,
Aye.
Councilor Gentile,
Aye.
Councilor Noel.
Aye.
Motion to deny carries 5 in favor, 3 nays.
Okay, so that takes care of this item, and we are going to go on to our next item. Just so everybody knows that we'll of course go back before the full council. Our next meeting is this coming Monday. Yes, someone correct me if I'm wrong. I can confidently say it will be on second call for discussion, and I expect that our conversation will continue there. Let me just pull up our next item on the agenda. This is item 325-23, request to transfer $50,000 from the Water Services Connections Full-Time Wages Fund. So let me just read this out in full. For honor, the mayor requesting authorization to transfer and expend the sum of $50,000 from the Water Services Connections Full-Time Wages account to the Water Fund Employee Workers' Compensation account in order to settle workers' compensation claim WC003360. And I do understand that we're gonna, I think we're gonna need, Mr. Curley, a change in account designation for this item. Is that correct?
Yes, good evening. That is correct. It is just, while somebody is on workers' comp, they get paid out of that 515201, its salary account. Because this is turning to a settlement, it is 572500, which I believe is in the last page of the packet, has the corrected account.
Okay. At this time, I would entertain a motion for executive session. And hold on one second while I just make sure that I am properly going over what we need to do to go into executive session. So in this particular case, the purpose of going into executive session would be to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body. And I do so declare that is the purpose of such a motion in this case. Is there such a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Councilor Humphrey. I would just let everybody know, since this is the last item on our agenda, our public meeting we will not reconvene in open session. So what will happen is, assuming that the vote is in favor to go into executive session, councilors will receive a separate link to convene in executive session. We will not return to open session at the conclusion. Mr. Cudmore, can you please call the roll as to the motion to go into executive session?
Yes, Councilor Grossman,
Aye.
Councilor Humphrey,
Aye.
Councilor Kalis,
Aye.
Councilor Norton,
Aye.
Councilor Oliver,
Aye.
Councilor Maliki,
Aye.
Counselor Gentile,
Aye.
and Counselor Noel.
Aye.
Okay, so we have a unanimous vote to go into executive session. We will do that. Mr. Cudmore will distribute the link to counselors and the members of the administrative staff who need to be present for the discussion. We will not reconvene in open session. And I want to thank everyone who's here tonight for their interest and participation in our meeting. We'll see you all, see those of you in executive session who should be there. Thank you.